So the title says King of the Road. What do you think? I mean, do you think this resonates with you?
A king is not a protected title. Anybody can call themselves king. In Africa, I made a film in Africa and all the children called me King Wimba.
In Congo?
In Congo, King Wimba. I don't know, they call anybody king.
But it's not just the king, it's the king of the road. I mean, your films are inspired by the road, this journey.
That's a serious title.
And you've come to India almost, we've been wanting you to come for many years. Some people told me after 19 years we've been writing to you. So I really want to know what inspired you to come here. I've never asked, I mean, we've been talking about it, but tell us how journeys are inspiration to your films and coming to India.
It's hard to answer because India is such a myth for me. And as I had another myth that I followed, which was America, which indeed was a myth. So India was a big thing for me. And I was shy and I was scared to come because I was hoping the myth would not explode like others. And you're on a good way, I think. Thank you.
Yeah. But the question to me was also about the road, about the journeys which you have taken. It's not just in India, but you've been to Australia, you shot a film in Congo, you've shot in South America, you've shot in Cuba. You've almost explored all over the world on many of your road trips and films. What inspires you for that?
I don't know if inspire is the word I would follow. I wanted to travel ever since I was a little boy, because I grew up in a city that was more or less flattened. I grew up in ruins. In August of 1945, that was the week the atom bombs were dropped in Japan, and my city was already flattened, and eventually when I grew up, I looked at newspapers and the encyclopedia in my grandfather's encyclopedia had survived the war, and there were pictures of the world in there and maps, and I couldn't believe all the beauty I saw in that. The world was not everywhere like it was in my town. It was not just all ruins. I mean, because as a kid you take it for granted. You see ruins around you, that's the world. It's beautiful, the world is beautiful. But I realized in other places it was much more beautiful. So I wanted to see them. Already as a boy, I only wanted to leave. And I remember the first time I took a train, I was 4 or 5. And I was so excited I was going to be on a train. Whew. It was only for 2 hours to go to my grand aunt to stay there for the summer vacation. My mother was pregnant and I think she didn't want me around. So I was sent to the country. And I was looking forward to a train ride, my first train ride. And my mother took me to the station, and I was so happy. I was going to be on a train, alone, traveling. And then my mother started looking for somebody in the train who would accompany me. And I was appalled. I didn't need anybody to accompany me. I wanted to ride the train alone. And she didn't understand it. So I really pushed her out of the train. I mean, we were still in the station. I really pushed her. She had to leave. I didn't want her to find some old lady who would take care of me. I wanted to sit alone in the train. I knew where I was going to get out. So traveling was in my bones from the beginning. And As soon as I had a bike, I traveled to Holland by bike. And anyway, I love traveling. And I did it before I realized I was going to be a filmmaker. And when I was a filmmaker, I realized you could make movies on the road. I didn't know that. I had to find out that this was an option. And when I found the option, I was a fish in the water. I was happy, and it was ideal for me to travel and make movies at the same time. So for a while I made some road movies, and then I realized there are also other movies. So I did not just only make road movies. You know that.
Yeah, of course. Of course. You wanted to be a painter. Yeah. We spoke about yesterday how the Cinematheque, Henry Langlois and the Cinematheque showed you films, and you went on to be a filmmaker. But I've read before that you've never really cared about film schools, and you didn't go to a film school. Or you did go. Sorry,
I did.
You did. Yeah, you didn't go.
I did go, but it sucked. It was the first film school in Germany, and they didn't exactly know what to do with us. We were the first students, 20 of us, and about 1,000 were rejected. There was an enormous amount of people who wanted to go to film school, the first one, and one of them was Rainer Werner Fassbinder, and they rejected him. Imagine, and he was so pissed off that he made 3 movies before we even made our first one in film school. And because in that school they didn't even think of having a camera. It was a film school, but not a single camera to be found. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So luckily I enlisted in the fall of '67. We suffered for a few months, and then came May '68, the student rebellion all over the world, and we took part in it, and we occupied the film school. And we threw everybody else out, and we hired our own professors, and we only gave up occupying it on condition they would get cameras, editing tables, and hire people who would teach film history, editing, how to deal with actors, how to write a script. None of that was there. They were teaching us history and communication and shit like that. It became a good film school because they adopted our own program, and they kept all the teachers we hired, and it became quite good afterwards.
Yeah. I'm really curious to know, how did you make your first film? I mean,
I will tell you. I mean, because there was no cameras, I sold my saxophone, and I bought a used Bolex 60mm for the same amount of money that my beloved saxophone got me. So I was the only student who owned a 60mm camera, and everybody shot on my camera. And I became the cameraman for all of my colleagues, and we shot until the school actually got real cameras. So we shot short films, and I also did short films on that. But my first feature film was at the end of studies, while Fassbinder was working on his 4th. I was beginning my first. And they gave us 20,000 marks each, which was a lot of money. And they said, you're supposed to make a short film in 35mm and color. 20,000. And 20,000 was a decent budget to shoot for a week and have a crew and a 35mm camera and shoot in color negative. And everybody did that, but I calculated and figured out that with 20,000 and 60mm black and white, I could shoot a film of 2 hours, not just 20 minutes. It's just I had to give up 35 and color, but 16, if I used every piece of film I had, I would get up to 2 hours. And that's what I did. I used the same amount of time than everybody else, but I shot a lot of stuff and always very long takes, because somehow nobody at film school had told us that we could say cut. So I did very long takes, and at the end, miraculously, I don't know how that could have happened, it was 2.5 hours long. And then the school, when everybody presented their end of studies film, so the graduation film, the school said, Wim, your film is too long. You have to cut it down a little bit. You see, it's not, the issue is not that you use every second you shot. You have to edit. You see, you have to cut a bit. And then I said, okay, if you think so, but I guess then I need an editor because I don't want to cut anything. and then I found this guy who was my age, was quite kind of tall, good-looking dude, and he said, I'm an editor. I can do this. And he presented himself to me, and he was confident and cocky, and I said, and I liked him. I said, okay, Peter, you edit my film. And then he sat down and he cut part of the first scene. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm editing. Anyway, he cut 20 minutes. So I didn't agree to more. And I found out that he'd never edited a film. He had been assistant editor, and all he ever did at the time was number the negative and the rushes, which is a stupid job. But he had watched the editor do it, so he thought he could do it. And he became my editor for the next 30 years.
Oh, really? That's amazing.
He was great. We did every film together, and we learned a lot together, and we actually learned how to cut things. Took a while.
Yeah. So one of the things which I've loved about your work is that many of the great filmmakers, whether it's Nicholas Ray, Samuel Fuller, I mean, you've always had in your films a lot of presence of some of the great filmmakers whom you've been inspired by. Is it just those, or are there any particular filmmakers in your growing years who had a huge impact on your career?
Well, yeah, there was a number of filmmakers I admired, especially when I went to film school. That first film I talked about, the 2.5-hour movie called Summer in the City, and it has a subtitle dedicated to the Kings. That film was very much influenced by John Cassavetes, who some of you might know. And I loved the films of Cassavetes, and so the film was very much influenced by it. And I got to meet him later, and he was a good friend and a great actor and director. And then I made the next film, which was after studies, The Goalie's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick, which you can also see in this retrospective. Today? Yeah. Oh, yes. Anybody who saw it today? Yes. Oh, wow. Thank you. So that was really my first, if I don't count the student film, that was my first. And if you've seen it, you realized maybe that it was heavily influenced by Alfred Hitchcock, except it had no suspense. I know there was something missing. It was my first film that took me to America. It was shown in New York at the MoMA in what they called New Directors, New Seasons, because it was my first film. And I did my first interview in my life on a film, and it was Vincent Canby of the New York Times, and he had an interview with me. And in that interview, he called my film Goalie's Anxiety an existential thriller. And I was so happy. I finally knew what I've done. I use it ever since. But it was Hitchcock. So that was my second film. The first one was Cassavetes' Imitation. Second one was Hitchcock, without the suspense. And then I did a historical movie after an American novel I loved as a student, The Scarlet Letter, and that was a total disaster. It was sort of a David Lean for poor people. Yeah. It was a historic movie that I wanted to shoot on the east coast of America, but we lost a lot of the money in the process, and in the end I could not even travel to America, let alone shoot there. And we shot the 17th century America in Spain, in a Western village where they shot spaghetti Western, because it was an American village. But it looked like any Western, and so the only budget I had in art department was to paint the whole village black. So it looked like a Puritan village. But the film was a disaster, and after the film I was ready to go back to painting or to writing or whatever, maybe get my saxophone back out of the pawn shop. But I said, maybe I'd try one more time, and this time it will not be a film based on anything I know. It will not be a Cassavetes, not a Hitchcock, not a historic movie. It will be something that I know that nobody else could do but me. And I realized that was really what filmmaking was probably all about. It was to do something that came from yourself and was not modeled on anything. And I put everything on one card, and I knew that if that movie was not so that I myself would like it, then I would not continue. And that became Alice in the Cities, and that made me a fan. It was a road movie. It was a road movie, and that I had discovered in Goli's anxiety in one single scene. In one single scene, we had traveled, and I realized on that one day of shooting that something was happening that was so much more exciting than being just in a location and shoot a scene indoors. So I realized you could make movies while you travel, and you could make movies without a script. Until then, I'd always had a script. And you could do it on the road, and you could do it in chronological order, and there was a different way to make movies. And I tried it out as good as I can, and it became Alice in the Cities, and that was really my first film.
The two things about, as we're talking about Alice, one is, of course, one question which I think a lot of people from the Institute, a lot of my batchmates or seniors are there, they would love to talk about Robbie Mueller, because he played such a crucial role for us growing up. It was Wim and Robbie Mueller, because we only spoke about that. And
you have to know that Robbie was the DOP on the film. And he already shot all three other films before. So he was my director of photography from the beginning, and he was also shooting Alice in the Cities.
I wanted to talk about his relationship with you. I mean, because I read that the camera, you would operate the camera many times and he would do the lighting. And what was your relationship?
Well, I left also the operating to Robbie because he was so much better than I was. And he was a couple of years older than I was, and he had never done a film before, a long feature film before. We did my student films, Summer in the City, and we learned a lot together. And Robbie had just a fantastic eye, and Robbie loved painting just as much as I did. And when we developed ideas for one of our films, for either of our films, we always talked in terms of painting. And I realized Robbie knew about lighting, and Robbie was a very gifted lighting cameraman and also fantastic operator. So with Robbie, I let him do the camera work, even if I insisted to set up the camera myself and the shot, because that was, I felt, the director's job was to set the shot. But I left the panning and operating to him, as well as the lighting. And Robbie was so much better than anything I had done myself as a student on my friends' movies. And we learned a lot together. And Robbie, a few films later, in the late 70s, became like the defining cameraman of his era and of a whole new generation of cameramen. Robbie was their hero. And I think he did his masterpiece with Paris, Texas, for instance, but also with other movies like Barfly. I mean, Robbie did a number of films that really marked his generation, and a lot of cameramen loved his work and were influenced by him. So Robbie and I really were a great couple of twin brothers for 20 years.
Because the same interest of Polaroids, there was a lot of things common.
We were brothers.
When you say you didn't have a script, what does it mean actually? You go to a set, you have an idea, and you begin to... How does it work? How do you cast actors then?
Well, I don't want to cast actors. Usually I take people I know, and because casting is the worst. I mean, was anybody of you ever involved in the casting process? It's a horrible situation. You sit there, and outside there's a lot of actors, and they all come in and present themselves. And that is terrible. Because it is, I don't know, I think it's humiliating for me and for them. Because I sit there, and when the person comes in, I know right away that's not who I thought of, with some exceptions. But then again, especially if somebody comes in who you know is completely wrong for the part, then you want to give them a chance, and you want to talk to them and want to hear what they do, and they do read, and the more they talk, the more they think they have a chance, and that's a disastrous situation. So I hate casting, and I really each time try to cast somebody I have already worked with, so then you know. Because if you cast somebody who you just met in a casting, then you have no idea who this actor is or actress until the first day of shooting. You can get along and you make a test, and they read the scene for you, and you get along really well, and then the first day of shooting comes, and then you have a different person in front of you. When the camera is rolling, something else is happening, and then only then you find out who that actor or that actress is. So I prefer to work with people who I've already worked with. There is a beautiful line that Burt Lancaster says in a film by Louis Malle. We don't do business with people we don't do business with. It's a film about the mafia. And that's how I think about actors.
But what about when you go to a set? How do you, when you say you don't have a script?
Then I'm happy. Because then I know that the actors in front of me who know the story, and the cameraman who knows the place and will invent the light, or maybe it's daylight and the light is already there. Then I know that together we can find out what the truth of the scene is we want to do. And we invent it, and then it's something truthful. But if you do a scene that you've wrote 6 months ago behind your typewriter, what the hell did you know? You didn't know these people, you didn't know the light, you didn't possibly know the place. So I like not knowing and finding out, and with the actors, of course I have some sort of idea where the story might go, but it's so great to do it, to invent it, and to give the place and the actors a chance to contribute. Because normally in movies, maybe some people don't know that, normally in movies, You have a script, and then production or the production manager or anybody who is in their right mind will ask you to shoot all the scenes that take place in his apartment. Well, you shoot them all in that apartment. And then you shoot all the scenes that are in that street. And then you shoot all the scenes that are in this city. You always, and this way, in most film shoots, you shoot the ending somewhere, either at the beginning or in the middle, and maybe the beginning you shoot at the very end, and you go zigzag in your film. And this is insane, because storytelling is about something else. Storytelling is about telling a story, and the story has a beginning, a middle, and end, and the only sane idea to tell a story is from beginning to end. So I always hated it, especially in Scarlet Letter. I shot it completely zigzag. And I got lost in the story, and the actors always get lost if you shoot this way. And nobody knows really where they are in the story, and everybody always gives their best, especially the actors. So they're full of energy, and they want to give their best in each scene because they don't quite know where they are in the story. And that's not good. A story is something that has ups and downs, and it's told. And if you tell it in continuity, it's a whole different thing. That is storytelling. If you have a child and this child wants to hear a story at night, you don't start with the end. You tell it from beginning, and the child follows, and only then it makes sense. And the story is about making sense. And I felt that in most movies, it doesn't make sense the way you tell the story. So I found out in Alice in the Cities, if you had a road movie, there was only one way that made sense, and that made sense even to the production manager, which was from beginning to end. The road has an itinerary, and the itinerary is chronological. So the road movie forced everybody to understand that I wanted to shoot in chronological order and that nothing else made sense. So I was so fulfilled and was so happy to tell my story every day, the next piece. And the actors knew exactly where they were. Everybody knew the story and was curious how it was going to go on, because that's a beautiful thing if you're in chronological order and you don't quite know where it's going. At any corner you can turn right or left. And that is exciting. And everybody wants to know, because they're all in the middle of a story and they want to know how it goes on. And that is inspiring, and that is really invigorating for the film. And it gives you the feeling that you're doing something truthful. And that, for me, is the most important thing in filmmaking. After my first 3 films that were inspired by something else, I realized, inspired by the truth of a story, because every story has its truth. So inspired by the truth of a story was the most beautiful thing in the process. So once I found out, I didn't want to let go. So I made 3 road movies in a row so people would realize that this was a good way. And only after that I went back to making movies with a script, and then I regretted it, and I thought, what an idiot. You're being imprisoned again. Next film you're going to make without a script again. Then I made a film without the script, and I had to write it every night, and then I said, what an idiot, next film you make it with a script. So this way I was going up and down, up till today. Really.
Wonderful, yeah. I would just love to do that. Yeah. Yeah. So should we, I think I'll have many questions, but I think it's important now we ask the audience some of the questions. Let's ask the audience, who's going to moderate that? Megha, is somebody going to moderate that? Let's take this forward from you. Alice in the Cities, yeah.
There's lots of hands, and they need a microphone in their hand. Okay, there we go.
My question is, what are your some of favorite Indian movies?
Well, I got introduced to Indian movies on my first encounter with history of cinema. In that encounter at the Cinematheque in Paris, I saw about 1,000 movies, maybe a few more, in the course of a year, because I started to watch movies at the Cinematheque because it was the cheapest cinema and I couldn't afford any of the commercial theaters, but the Cinematheque was very, very cheap. And for nothing you could see a film and get an introduction. So first I saw one film, then I saw 2 films a day, finally I saw everything they had, and it was entire world cinema, and I saw a huge dose of Indian films as well, because Henri Langlois was very fond of Indian films, and I saw Indian films with subtitles in languages that I couldn't even read. But I saw the movies, and later on I realized Satyajit Ray was one of the great filmmakers of his generation, and he was still alive. I actually met him was amazed how tall he was. and he's one of the few filmmakers I had to look up to. And in 1973 he presented his film Distant Thunder in Berlin. Later he was going to win the festival with this film, but I didn't know that when I approached him when he was standing in the lobby, and probably everybody was too shy to talk to him. He was drinking his coffee. I went straight to him, and we had a long talk. And he was very kind and gentle, looking down at me and answering all my questions. I was really, my heart was beating, but I was amazed that he answered all my questions. He was such a gentleman. And of course, I saw his film. It was playing the next day, and then when he won the film, I was very proud that I actually had spoken to him. I just had made Alice in the City, so I felt I was a filmmaker already. So I just made that the year before. So that was a huge encounter in my life. And then I went, that was before there was videothèques, or you couldn't rent a film. To see more of his was very difficult, and I had to travel and see movies in retrospectives, and because you couldn't just rent a film, and there was no streaming, there was no cassettes, there was nothing at the time. Cassettes came up in the late 70s, so to see more of Satyajit Ray wasn't that easy, but I saw a lot of his films. And maybe because it was one of the first, the music room remained my favorite. And of course, it's finally also available on DVD, then on Blu-ray. So I bought a VHS of it, I bought a DVD of it, and I bought a Blu-ray of it. So I bought it in every shape it came in. There you go.
Yeah, that's it, I think.
Welcome to Mumbai, Mr. Wenders. They say that society inspires art and art influences society. So there has been a discourse from a real long time and even recently that how films somehow influence an individual, that what they see transcends into their real life, and maybe in ways good or bad, it is emulated in the real life. Now, personally, I have been influenced like that, in ways good and bad. So my question to you is, because this is probably the first time and my luckiest that I'm talking to someone who has made films for such a long period of time. So yes, there's a view of film as an art, as a personal expression, but your view towards films transcending into someone's life, yours and the audience, how that view has changed over such a long period of time. Thank you.
Well, the way you started about art and society and how one produces and influences the other, and the individual reacting to film and stuff, in a way that is an image that I grew up with, and I very much relate to it. But let's face it, it's the good old days. Today it's not art and society, because today it's, well, people, individuals, social media, and art. They're always in between. And you can't escape it. I mean, when you sit in the movie theater, in the end, yes, you might be exposed to a film. And that's a lucky experience. And I'm such an ardent defender of restoring films because it gets people back into theater. And that is the only way where you have the situation that you talked about, the individual and film. Let's not call it art, because art is such a high term. Movies are also craft, and there's collaboration and an effort by many people. So let's call it film. Between the single person and the film, there is a fantastic relationship. Only that today it's almost gone. Most people in this world don't sit there, but they sit at home and they're alone and they watch a movie that they see on a streaming services. And that situation that you described between art and society is long gone. It's gone. It's the past. And today we have to relate otherwise, unless people are so lucky like you to sit in the beautiful Regal Theater. That is, maybe in India it's still more alive than in other places of the world where this would be empty now, mostly. But the relation between the film and the single person is what is driving me, because I was in that situation. I had other dreams for my life. I wanted to become a painter, and I also wanted to become a musician, and I also wanted to become a writer. But I sat there ready to become a painter and saw 1,000 movies, and some of them touched me deeply. And some of them touched me more than any painting ever touched me. And I realized, wow, that's better. Movies are something better, because some of them had to do with my life and with my fears and with my hopes. And movies reflected so much more existence and my own existence and existential feelings that I realized that was it. That's what I wanted to do. So movies convinced me to change my life and go in another direction. And then I realized I was in the position, when I was in a position to make movies, I realized now somebody else might sit there and eventually see a film I had been doing and possibly feel something or get something that I wanted to send to that person. And that is a huge responsibility. And the more movies I made, the more I realized you can't escape that. Movies are not content or products or an industry. It's an expression, and it's something I invest things in of myself, of my own life, of my own experience, and it's things I live with my cameraman and with my actors, and that come out of places that are dear to me, because my films are very much place-driven. So in the end, it's an existential thing, and movies are a very privileged medium to translate that. And that is a very old idea. I have that idea from when movies convinced me I should belong to them. And ever since, I tried to live up to that. You don't always succeed. You don't always connect in a way that you feel people are really... It changes something in their experience, but sometimes you can do that. And I feel that's still the best you can do as a filmmaker, and I try to live up to that best whenever I can, because this is my duty, because movies changed my life, and ever since I do movies, I learned so much from doing them, and every film is a new lesson and a new experience. And with every film you can find out what you're here for, or what you're doing, and why you're living. And that is the most burning question, even in the fucking digital age. What are we living here for? And even if all the junk we get surrounded with doesn't help us, And even if the social media should not be called social because they're totally asocial, antisocial, even then, films are an interactive medium, and they're very social, and they're existential at best. So please believe in that relation. I make movies not to have them sit on shelves as print or digital files. I make movies so that some people can sit there and complete the film that I suggest. And you complete it with your own story and your own history and your own existence, and you are my co-author right now. Thank you. Thanks.
You speak so beautifully. One can just keep hearing you.
Hi, Wim.
Where are you?
Yeah. Yeah, so I watched Wings of Desire for the first time yesterday, and I'm still processing it. I would have loved to watch it again if it was playing again. So I just want to know, how did you write the characters, which are the strangers, and their thoughts? What was the first thought that come to you when you think of those characters who are just randomly there?
As a filmmaker, I do not know what people think. I don't know what anybody thinks, but in a film, you can imagine all sorts of thoughts, and everybody has their very own thoughts, and the angels were amazing characters. And they, even if it's a total fiction, if it was in the beginning a total fiction for me, the fiction was they can listen to your thoughts. So we had to imagine these thoughts, and we had to invest a lot of imagination into thoughts, and also listen to a lot of people what they were thinking. I did ask a lot of people, hey, what do you think? And if you sit in the subway, what are you thinking of? And of course, you can't really know, and nobody can put a microphone on my head and find out what I'm thinking. But it's an invention. But listening to somebody's thoughts makes one thing very clear, that for the angels, every person is the same. There is no important people for them, and there is no good or bad people. Everybody is an entity, and he or she has her or his own thoughts, and everybody is the same on this planet. And angels really believe in equality, and in equality everybody has their own thoughts. And that was the idea of the film, that people are all equal, and everybody is its own universe. So it was quite a challenge to make that clear, and we could have made people think of other things than what they actually were doing. And in subtitles, we can only subtitle a little bit of it. Sometimes there's a whole cacophony of voices, and you cannot possibly know what they're all thinking. But if you find somebody who's thinking in your own language, then you can catch it. So it was a bold idea, and I was very happy with the idea, because I could never really express in a film how much all people are equal than in this film. And I thought it was a great idea to come up with these characters who were so humble and so democratic at the same time. I don't quite know if I answered your question, but somewhere around your question. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to just ask you one thing. You've worked on different formats, and one of the things which I personally think is you're perhaps one of the greatest assets you've had is shooting films on 3D. And that's what is going to be screening from tomorrow, Anselm and Pina. How did you explore that? I mean, is that something which, because you're seeing different layers, you're seeing a different kind of an image sense, recreating that image back.
Has anybody of you seen any of my 3D films already? There are a few of them. Because there's a lot of prejudice about 3D. There's a lot of prejudice what 3D represents. And the big prejudice is it is spectacular and you can blow up the world and it's a lot of action and God knows what. But 3D is really the opposite. 3D is really a medium that brings out all the poetry that movies are capable of. Except that 3D was owned by big studios and they thought it was a great thing to make more money with. And that's why 3D got into the wrong direction from the beginning. And only a handful of filmmakers really tried to find out what it could actually do. And one of them, by the way, is James Cameron. I think James Cameron really showed a lot. Well, he went also for action, and there's a lot of wars going on in Avatar at the end, at least, and I was pissed off at him that he couldn't think of a better way to end the story of his beautiful people, the blue guys and girls. I really loved them, but in the end it was Star Wars once all over, and I was a little pissed off at him, but I still think he is a fantastic filmmaker, and and even the continuation, Avatar 2, seriously, did you see it? It's a movie on education. How to deal with your teenage children. That is what the film is about. So I think it's courageous. And he showed the poetry that 3D is capable of. And I first tried that with the film Pina on dance, because I love the choreography that Pina Bausch invented. She invented a whole new art genre. She invented something that she called dance theater. It had nothing to do with theater, and it had nothing to do with ballet. It was something altogether different. She invented a whole language that did not exist before. And when I first saw that, I don't like ballet, I must say. My girlfriend had to drag me into a show by Pina Bausch, and I thought, oh, this is going to be dance, I can't stand it. And after 10 minutes, I was sitting there in one of the first rows on the edge of my seat, and I found myself weeping. And I didn't know what happened to me and what this woman with these dancers on stage was doing, because they moved me more than any movie ever moved me. And I realized there was something I did not know at all. And I had never seen, and I loved the work of Pina Bausch, and I got to meet her, and she's the most fantastic artist I met at the time. And I wanted to find out her secret, and Pina said, oh yes, Wim, let's do something together. Why don't you make a movie about my work? And I said, okay, Pina, but I wouldn't quite know how to do that, so give me a little time. Because I realized what I saw on stage, and I was sitting there, I didn't know what tool I had to adequately show that. Dancers on stage, if you sit there, and especially Pina's dancers, because they're actors and dancers at the same time, and they don't do ballet, they represent something altogether different, that is life itself. And it's especially the relationship between women and men that she was working on, and that she explored and made more visible than I'd ever seen in a movie. So I did not know how I can possibly film that. So even if she liked the idea, and each time we met, she said, Wim, you said you wanted to make a film with me, but when is it happening? I said, Pina, I don't know how to do it. Give me a little more time. And that lasted 20 years. I saw each and every play of hers. I went to each premiere. I sat there weeping. I loved her work And each time she looked at me, and at the end she didn't ask me anymore, when are we doing it? She just looked at me and lifted her eyes, and I shrugged. And we didn't even do any conversation. And then I saw the first film in 3D. It was a stupid movie called U2 in 3D. It was a concert film with U2.
Bono.
But I saw the technology for the first time, because 3D had once existed in the 50s and was completely disappeared. And then it came back in 2007 or 8 in digital shape, and out of a sudden it was doable. Except U2 in 3D was a prototype, and it was done with prototype equipment, and there was no technology really there yet, and it was also not so well. But it gave me an idea that with that new medium, and it was going to be a medium eventually and very soon, I hoped I could do justice to Pina's dance, because I could be in the same space as her dancers. Because her dancers, first of all, were doing whatever they were doing in space. And space was so essential. And for the first time in that stupid movie, I realized space was available. I could represent space. So I figured I could also use it to make a film with Pina. So at the end of that film, I took my phone and called Pina, and I only said one line, "Now I know how to do it." And she said, "Yes." And that became a movie only 2 years later, because unfortunately the technology was all prototypes and had to be explored. And I was very, very lucky that I found a technician, a cameraman, who had dedicated already his entire career to developing 3D. And when I came to him, he realized that, I mean, he was my chance in Europe, because there was no equipment available to shoot in 3D. But he had a prototype camera, and he had worked on this, and he was my chance, and he realized I was his chance to make a film together. I like your laugh. So we really learned from each other a lot, and he made the only film, the only real film in 3D of his life. That was Pina. He was already old, and he died 2 years afterwards. But he died a happy man, because he had proved that it could be done. And without him, without Alain de Robe, I could not have made Pina, because it was not yet on the market. And we shot Pina before Avatar was in movie theaters. And we were editing the film already when finally Avatar came out over Christmas, and I went to see it, and I was so happy. There it was. And I realized all the theaters in Germany were starting to get equipment in 3D, because my film was without any chance, because there were no theaters to play it. But thanks to Avatar, there was now 300. And I'm eternally grateful for James Cameron for having done it, because it made my film not just a pipe dream. It was, and I think I realized the potential of it, the potential of being able to enter space with your cameras and to represent space, which in film is always wrong. I mean, in any of my road movies, of course, we pretended to be in space. I mean, a road leads you into space. But space on a flat screen, this is always a flat screen, is always a pretext. It's always like a make-believe. And films have invented great ways to make you believe you're in space. Cameras are moving, and there's traveling shots and cranes and Steadicam. All of these devices make you believe you're entering space, but you're not really. It's all flat. And space is something altogether different. Space is three-dimensional. And on a 3D screen, there is no screen. You could look through it. There's things in front of it, although that is sometimes a little too much and phony. But there's also things way in the back of the screen, and you can see through it. And in Pina, I thought, this is it, space. Finally, I can be in the space with dancers. But during the film, I learned that 3D is not just conquering space, but it's also showing people so much more than they've ever seen, because as it is in 3 dimension, it is multiplying the act of seeing by 1 dimension, and it's quadrupling all the information you have in the brain. And only later, from my beloved professor Alain Derobe, who developed the 3D cameras we were shooting with, and he also had studied the physiology of the act of seeing, and he showed me that when you see a 3D film, other parts of your brain are active that normally in movies are turned off. They're just not working. And in 3D, a whole part of your brain is very active, and you are more participating. You're emotionally more engaged. And that's why it's such a sin that you're emotionally engaged in a stupid action movie. And that the American studios use this medium for bullshit instead of using it to make the maximum of your own effort to take it in. So, I better stop with that.
Yeah. The other thing which we're going to ask, we're just going to ask you just one last question, because just to get his career graph, even 2 hours is very little for Wim. There's so many. Your relationship with a lot of musicians, you have a special relationship with Bono, U2. You did the film on Buena Vista Social Club, which almost revived the Cuban musicians. Clearly, you're... Oh, it did. It did.
They became the Beatles.
Yeah.
They actually became like the Beatles at the age of 80.
Very special film. I just loved that film and loved the way you did it. But tell us about Buena Vista Social Club and the experience of working with...
That's a long story, but I make it short. Because I do love music, and one of the reasons why I was so convinced that movies were such an incredible art was that it always involved music. In all the films I loved, music was essential. And it was not that it was related to photography and theater and acting and landscapes and painting, but also always music was involved. And as I'd given up my saxophone in order to buy a camera, I always felt, was it really the right decision? Shouldn't I have kept my saxophone? So I always thought I had a bad conscience towards music. It was something I'd given up. So, but then I realized that in movies you didn't have to give it up. And the most precious moment in every film, in the process of every film for me, is when the images and your cut for the first time encounter their music. And that is a beautiful moment. But music is a driving force in my life, and I love music, and especially when it's loud. And so, and I always love, and I don't know if I would want to make a movie if I wasn't allowed to use music. So that's always like the greatest challenge. What is the music for the film? And sometimes the music is already there, and the film is dedicated to it, like with Buena Vista Social Club. And that started because I have a very, very good friend, and he's a famous guitarist, and he made the soundtrack for Paris, Texas, and that's Ray Cooder. Yes. And Ray is one of the great, not only musicians, but also one of the great music producers. He produced an amazing amount of beautiful music in Africa, but also in Cuba. And after Paris, Texas, we made 2 or 3 other movies. And on the last one that we worked together, it was called The End of Violence, which you also show. In The End of Violence, he also produced the score for the film, and he was different than the previous times we had worked together. He was distracted, and he was sitting at the window looking out and dreaming, and we weren't really advancing with our score. And eventually I asked him, Rai, what's up? What are you thinking of? You're not with us here. And he said, I'm sorry, Wim, I was still in Havana. And I said, what the fuck did you do in Havana? And he said, I just recorded some music there, and it's the best thing I've done in my life. And I can't help it. In my heart, I'm still there. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. I should be more dedicated to our work. I said, no, let me know what you did in Havana. I said, I cannot let you listen to it. It's not finished. I said, come on, Rai. I bet you have a cassette or something. And he said, yes. And he pulled this audio cassette from his pocket. This is my rough mix, but you can't listen to it. It's not finished. I'm going to go back, and we're improving it, and we're putting other tracks. And I said, Rai, you give me that cassette. I'll return it to you tomorrow. And he said, but you can't give it to anybody else. And you can only listen to it, and you give it to me tomorrow, and you don't talk about it because it's not finished. I said, okay. So I had the cassette, and we went on working all day long, and in the evening I went into my car, and my car had a cassette recorder. You know, cars had cassette recorders. At home, I didn't have one anymore. But in the car, I had a cassette recorder. I was driving home in Los Angeles. It takes sometimes a little longer. So for half an hour, I listened to the cassette, and I thought it was unbelievable. It was some of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. So I didn't drive home because I wanted to continue. I knew at home I couldn't go on listening. So I kept driving, and eventually my wife called me. What's happening? Where are you staying? I said, I'm still driving. I'm coming home. So I listened to the entire cassette. And I gave it back to Rai the next day, as I promised. And I said, who are these young guys you made this music with? Who did you find in Havana to make this music? And he laughed and he said, they weren't exactly young. Most of them are over 80. And I said, you're kidding, I don't believe you. The music was so fresh and so, what's the word if you catch a disease from somebody else? What's the word? Contagious, exactly, thank you. It was so contagious, it could not be old fellows or old people. So I said, the next time you go, I come with you. And he said, okay, I'll tell you. And that was the beginning of Buena Vista Social Club, because a couple of months later, he called me and said, Wim, I'm going. I said, where are you going? I said, to Cuba. You wanted to come along. He gave me 3 days. 3 days later, he was leaving, and I just had the time to get a cameraman. We had no budget. I had a cameraman, a sound engineer, and my wife, Donata. We were flying to Cuba with no idea what we were going to do there. Not a slightest idea. I'd never been to Cuba. I just had listened to that music once on a cassette, and I had said, I'm going to come with you, and I was so curious to meet these people. And we met them, of course, right away on arrival. And they were old. Kampai Segundo was 84 or so. And they were very suspicious. Rai was coming with this gang of 4 Germans who they didn't know. And these Germans, I explained to them, we wanted to shoot some of the recording. They were going to start that next day. And they looked at us full of suspicion. What, you're going to film while we're making music? And they looked at Rai and said, they're good guys. But they didn't quite believe it. And the next day, we started filming, and the studio was way too dark. Electricity is not happening in Havana. And the studio was just a little lamp, and everybody was working in the dark, and we realized we needed more light in order to film, but we tried to shoot, and it was miserable, and they were suspicious of us, and it didn't feel right. And so finally we broke for lunch, and we had made a big effort to have something to eat for everybody, which in Cuba at the time was very difficult. Our Cuban production manager that we hired from the state film ministry, she had spent half of our budget on getting something to eat for everybody, because we wanted to eat with the musicians, they had to eat. So, and we had some chicken and rice and sandwiches in the lobby, and so they all jumped out of the studio to get something to eat. And only my DOP, who was also the steady camera of the film, stayed in the studio. And so we were all in the lobby when out of a sudden, over the loudspeakers that the engineer by chance had not turned off, we heard a Bach sonata. It was my DOP who had picked up Cachaito's stand-up bass, and he also had a bow, and he had started to play on it. And he didn't know that the microphone was still on. And he didn't know we were going to hear it in the lobby. And all the musicians had their sandwiches, and they looked at each other, what's happening? Somebody is using our instruments. And they all rushed back, and there was my cameraman, and he played, just his eyes closed, a Bach sonata. And the musicians were excited. He not only carried the camera, he also played the bass. And out of a sudden, we were good guys. and from then on, it was smooth sailing. They loved us, and we could do whatever we want. And if sometimes we stopped shooting in order to change a cassette, they stopped making music, and they seriously said, "Why do you stop? Don't you like us anymore?" And that became the film, this mutual friendship. And it was too good to be true, because these guys were unknown at the time. When we shot in the studio, Ibrahim Ferrer was still shining shoes as a main profession. Of course he was in the studio, and he couldn't believe his luck that Rai, it was all Rai's merit. Rai knew his voice from old recordings and said, is this guy still around? And they found Ibrahim, and he came into the studio from shoe shining. And these guys still were poor as hell. And they all believed in their music, and they stuck to it, and they were so pure and innocent, and still making this music, even if in the eyes of the world it was obsolete. And the album wasn't released yet, you see. So we shot with these musicians who were forgotten. And they loved being filmed, because they realized maybe they weren't all that forgotten after all. And 6 months later, they were playing Carnegie Hall, and people went wild and all stood on their seats, and they had become the Beatles.
Shall we, Raja, you wanted to ask a question? Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Wenders, what has stayed with me the most when I look at your films are these moments where characters don't really say anything. You know, you have the woman dancing in the headlights.
You mean I should give up on dialogue?
In bits and pieces. But these moments that linger, you know, the woman dancing in the headlights, the child looking out onto Berlin, the old man looking at the sun coming through the trees. So all these moments where the camera just lingers, you find what is inherently human and profound about the characters, and you linger on them. So I'm curious about, if Wim Wenders were to make a Wim Wenders film about himself, what would you linger on? What do you think would be the silent moment?
No, that I'm going to make that film.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please help me.
Yeah, sure.
I wouldn't want to make a movie on myself. Because already with every film you do expose yourself. If you want it or not, if you look at a film as a learning process, it comes from your experience and you have to invest everything you have in order to find out something new. So I'm already making a film with everything I have, but not on me, because you're exposing yourself, and the hope is always that it's not private, because private is no good, but personal. So only a personal film, I think, can reach people personally. And private films are embarrassing. Sometimes in movies there are moments of privacy, like, I'm sorry to say that, but when people have sex in a movie, I think I should not be there. This is a private affair. But for some reason, people do that all the time in movies. They kiss and stuff, and I'm so embarrassed to sit there because it's private. It's not personal. So I like to be personal, but I wouldn't want to be private, and doing something with myself would be private. But so I take your question more in a different way. Why do I linger on things? And why do I want to show you something that is not exactly the plot, but maybe something that in other movies would be cut out? And the little play of leaves on the ground that you might see in Perfect Days, and you're sitting, in front of you is sitting my wife. She shot all these shots with the... So, and she lingers. She taught me to linger. No, I like lingering, and I like the camera to stay a little longer on things, so you start looking in a different way. So we all got used, myself too, to think in terms of plot or story when we watch a movie. And every now and then, when the film shows us something that is not story-driven, but is the character, or is life itself, or is light, or is a place that tells you something, I like that. And so sometimes I escape the story-driven sensation of filmmaking and linger. And this is almost my favorite moments. And I started to trust these moments that I like sometimes much more than simple story or dialogue. And even dialogue, if it's not story-driven, mostly gets cut out. But some of the dialogue that is not about the story, but about the existential situation of somebody, can be so much more beautiful. So the older I get, the more I linger.
Thank you.
Anyone at the back there? Yeah. The first, anyone there?
Hi, can you hear me? Hi. So, over here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He is in the back, yes. How did you see him?
I didn't see that. I mean, I wore a yellow shirt for a reason. So, hi, my name is Siddharth, and my question really is with regards to what you said initially about how you were shedding the influence of Hitchcock and the other filmmakers. So, as someone who's like in that dilemma right now, I'm wondering, how do you go about it? Because at least for filmmakers of this day and age, we're almost trained to play it safe. It's like we aren't necessarily encouraged to think as much. So how does one go about finding their own voice? And also on the lighter note, I love this interaction because I always imagined you to be a Hitchcock character, like the poster behind you, with like an overcoat and a hat and you in black and white. So I'm really enjoying this. But yeah, how do I find my voice?
Can you get me an overcoat? I do think that anybody who wants to be involved in film does have his or her own voice already, even if you don't dare to speak up in your own voice. But if you love film, something in you is able to express itself like nobody else. Every filmmaker has that in him or her. You do have that. But you have to dare to, well, first of all, you have to have the courage to find it, and then the courage to speak in that language. And most of the time, the present industry all over the world, not just in Hollywood or in India or in every country, the industry doesn't really want to hear your own voice. They want to hear a voice that suits, that follows the rules. And the rules are quite elaborate these days. But every now and then somebody breaks out of the rules, and out of a sudden other people realize, wow, he didn't obey to the rules and it's still a great movie. So it is possible. It's always been possible. And I just suffered from the fact that I realized maybe I had my own voice, but I hadn't tested it yet. So, and yes, I did love Hitchcock, and I could have gone on making movies because most people can go on using an official language of filmmaking. And in India, certainly just as well as in America, there is a language that is solidified by box office and by good results and by good reviews, but it's not necessarily personal, or it's not necessarily your own voice. And some of the great directors today never expressed their own voice, but they followed the rules and made movies that were very successful. And you can be a filmmaker without getting to know your own voice. But if you want to know your own voice, you can be sure you have it, and you can be sure it's worth exploring and worth finding it. Because before you can show it, you have to find it. And it can be very satisfying to find it. And it can be troublesome, but every trouble is worth it, because you're going to be so much yourself with the next film you make. It doesn't happen from one day to another. Don't be scared of it. It's a learning process, and it'll take a while. But when it happens, and when you do something that only you could have made, then you know that. You will know that. And that's a different feeling than to make a film according to the recipes of filmmaking.
But if you really look at some of the great American directors whom I also enjoyed, whether it's Nicholas Ray, for instance, there was the Hollywood system which he worked under, whether it was Rebel Without a Cause or any of those great films. But there was a lot of personal voice in his films, or the films of John Ford, who always denied it was just merely a form of shooting.
A lot of these Hollywood directors had to arrange themselves with the studio and make believe they followed all the rules, but none of them did. Nicholas Ray, who made Rebel Without a Cause, which you certainly know, most of the film was rewritten the night before. And he made other movies that had nothing to do with the story that the studio had assigned them to. And I mean, they were highly personal filmmakers who managed to hide their films, because they were mostly low-budget films, inside the Hollywood studio system. And Nick was used to writing every night for the next day and change the dialogue and make a film that he thought was necessary. And not every film is necessary because the money is there for it in the studio, or the producer wants you to make it. It can become necessary. And most of these Hollywood directors found their language, or at least a style. John Ford might have been much more of a stylist than a personal filmmaker, but in the end you realize that nobody else could have made these movies. Nobody else could have made them, and nobody else could have shown that aspect of American history like his Westerns. Nobody else had it in them to to actually go to location. Most people shot Western in California. John Ford was one of the only people who said, no, I want to be in Monument Valley and I want to shoot it in Arizona. People didn't do that at the time. He invented to go with 2,000 extras into the desert. So it took courage to do that, and of course it was also successful. And he always pretended to be a studio guy, but boy, he was not. But he never blew his cover. He also,
yeah, we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. Fritz Lang, for instance, he made such personal films in Germany, amazing movies. And he went to Hollywood, and a lot of people think he failed in Hollywood because his Hollywood films weren't that successful. And he came back to Germany. I look at these films and I think they're totally amazing, and he did something that nobody else did in Hollywood. But I don't know. It is a lot of films are only reveal what they have done in their day and age a little later. And even Fritz Lang in Germany, I don't know, Metropolis might be the #1 film in history of filmmaking, but when it came out in Germany, it was a total flop. Nobody liked it. He got the worst reviews. Did you know that? It was a disaster. And now it's the best film in history. So sometimes perspectives change, and also how personal the film it was and how daring it was and how much he put his whole existence at stake to make that film.
In fact, Metropolis, the complete version, was found in Argentina. They had lost the print. It never existed because distributors had edited the film. In fact, we found Tiger of Vishnupur, which is the 1930 film of Fritz Lang. So many of his early works had gone. But at the same time, Wim, one of my favorite directors is Antonioni, and you completed, or you worked with him to complete a film, and the title jointly says directed by Antonioni and Wim Wenders, Beyond the Clouds. How was that experience?
I have to correct you.
Yeah.
The film says directed by Michelangelo Antonioni, and
yeah.
It has a different title afterwards. It says that I also directed some parts. The fact is he directed it. But he could not have done it because Michelangelo Antonioni, as amazing a filmmaker and as independent, and if anybody had his own voice, it was Antonioni. His films look like no other films ever looked before and afterwards. He was 40 years old when he made his first film. He was an architect, and his films have an architectural language to them. And he invented shots that nobody did before in the history of filmmaking. So this man had a stroke when he was in his late 70s, and he couldn't move his right hand well anymore. But most of all, he had lost his speaking ability largely. So he couldn't speak anymore. He knew a dozen simple words. He could say niente, which meant no, nothing. He could say a few words, but he couldn't express himself anymore. He could write with his left hand, and he wanted to make another movie. And all the producers in the world said, no, the director has to be able to speak. And then somebody had the good idea to say, what if we find another director who becomes his voice, or who will step in if ever Michelangelo cannot, if it turns out he cannot do his job as a director. So if you find a director who, for the insurance, is a standby and a security for Michelangelo, then maybe he can make a film. And Michelangelo was asked who he wanted to have as a standby director, and he wrote it, Wim. So they called me, and I realized it was a pretty dangerous job, because you had to be there all the time, from the writing to location to casting to shooting to editing, but you weren't really making the movie, except if Michelangelo couldn't do it. But getting to know him and starting to work with him, I realized, of course, he could do it. I mean, he was full of piss and vinegar and emotions, and he could draw, and he knew exactly what movie he wanted to make. So I took the job, and I was 50 already. For the first time in my life, became an assistant to another director. I had never done that. When I was a film student, I'd never been assistant. So Michelangelo made it very clear that what he wanted, and the deal with the producers were, Michelangelo was going to make 4 short stories of his own, written by Tonino Guerra into 4 short scripts, and he was going to do these 4 because they felt that each of them was a week of shooting, and that reduced the risk. So he was going to do 4 episodes, and my job was to do something like a framework around it that tied the 4 stories, and we would do that afterwards. But first of all, Michelangelo was to direct these 4 short stories, 4 love stories. And he came in on time in each of the stories, not a day late, and he made it clear that nobody could have possibly done these 4 short films like him. Except it was not so easy to translate his desires to the crew, and that was really the job, because as he couldn't really say the night before why he wanted the camera and what he wanted to have as a first shot, and every production wants to know that. Where do you start tomorrow? So Michelangelo could just show it on the photograph. That's the location where I want to start. And then he would be on the location in the morning, and he would walk around for an hour, and then he would take a piece of paper, and he would stamp his foot and said, "We're going to start here." And then we have a track that goes up to there. And then I had to translate it to the crew. Okay, so I don't quite know what he's going to do, but the first shot will be a tracking shot from here to there. And that's how we worked every day. And my job was being the translator, so to speak. Translate his intuition and his wishes into, well, a dialogue with the crew, and the cameraman and everybody sometimes looked at me, what does he want now? The actors also. The actors, if you have a director who don't speak to you, they just always turn to me and said, we don't know what he wants. And then I tried my best to translate it. And if I was wrong, Michelangelo made it damn sure that everybody knew I was totally wrong. But at least we knew I was wrong, and that helped us to find what was right. So it was a long process, and it was an incredible process, realizing that this man could pull the movie out of his actors and his crew and his cameraman, exactly the film that he wanted, no compromise, but it was a tedious, long process, and we just managed to do it in time. And it was also painful because he suffered from not being able to speak, and sometimes he got mad at everybody. He pushed his finger at his head. You're stupid. You're all stupid. He turned to everybody and said, you're all stupid, to his actors, stupid. Because he couldn't express it, but then at least knew he wanted something very different. So we started to dig and find what he wanted until he started smiling, and then we knew, oh, this is the way.
Amazing. Yeah, can we have some few questions? Celine, you want to ask? Or somebody's asking.
So, can I ask?
Sure.
I'm here.
Yeah. Where are you?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, thank you. It was such a pleasure listening to you. It seems like watching a film. Last 2 hours, I don't know how it just passed.
Not 2 hours as yet.
Yeah. So, Wim, I'm just asking a simple question I feel like I have to ask, because when I was watching your films, Room 666 was my first film. I just want to ask, why a television always there in your films? And is it What is it that you have the relationship with the presence of a screen and a television? And especially with Room 666, why a sports and when you're interviewing people about the future of cinema?
I have to explain, because not all of you know Room 666, right? That was...
It was shown today.
It was shown today.
Yeah.
But not everybody has seen it.
Yeah.
That was a funny little thing, because it happened in Cannes 1982, I think. And I was there, and there were a lot of other directors there. And in the early 80s was a time of great insecurity in cinema. Television had taken a lot of attention from cinemas. A lot of directors were starting to direct for television. The language of television was invading cinemas more and more, probably more the language of advertising, because the language of television was very much influenced by advertising more and more so, and shows started to be cut much faster, like television, like advertising. And so the language of film slowly got invaded by the language of advertising via television. It was a strange time, and there was a huge insecurity, and the first theaters were closing because people were not coming anymore, and there was also video that was had just appeared a few years before. Home video was a new thing, and a lot of people saw movies on television. It's not on the street anymore. So it was a time of great insecurity. And I was at the festival and realized all these directors were there. And I wanted to make a film about the state of cinema and whether it was going to remain its own language or not. So I put that question to all the directors at the festival, but as I don't like to do interviews, I came up with an idea that I rented a room in a hotel. That's why it's called Room 666. It was the only room available in Cannes at the Martinez, because nobody wants to stay in Room 666. So we hired the room, and it was a regular hotel room. It had a television. And hotel rooms without television were impossible at the time. So I had on the table, I had the question, my question about the future of cinema and whether it was going to remain its own language. And every director, and there was a camera, a 60mm camera and a Nagra. And most directors know how to work a camera and a Nagra. So they would come into the room and they would read the question, and they'd be alone, and turn on the camera, answer the question, and turn it off again. And most of the directors at the festival took part in it. And Godard was there, and Fassbinder was there, and Antonioni was there. He was the most outspoken and the most elegant, and he answered the question the best. He really had an idea of what the future of cinema would be. And I didn't really know him yet, but I was so impressed by his answer. So there was 20 answers. And that film became Room 666 with all these answers. Godard was also very outspoken. Godard was the only director who knew exactly how long a reel of 60mm was. So he looked at his watch in the beginning, and then he spoke for 12 minutes, and then he looked at his watch again, stood up, and turned off the camera the very moment when it ended anyway. He was the only one who knew exactly how long film was. So each of them gave their answer, and that became an inquiry on the future of cinema. And 2 years ago, a young woman made the same film 40 years later, and she also asked. She used the same device, but she also had a television. And I had the television on each time before somebody would come, because we always want to know what that person would do. Some people would leave it on. Werner Herzog was the first to turn it off right away. And he actually took his shoes off too. I mean, everybody had his or her own way to deal with the television set. And because television was the elephant in the room, so to speak, for the future of cinema, I wanted television to be there. But I've made movies without television. If you've seen Perfect Days, that guy doesn't have a TV.
Yeah, Amrit, yeah. Just Amrit, yeah.
13 years later, 1982 you made, 1995 in the city, we made a film called Room Number 1605. You were in Hotel Martinez, we were in Hotel Oberoi. You faced the Riviera, we faced the Arabian Sea. And we also had television. It was my idea, and paradoxically, it was televised in Kerala, prime time, by Asianet Television.
I didn't manage that.
But when you are in Trivandrum, my colleague will show it to you. He'll meet you. Yep. We had 11 filmmakers, including Mridal Sen, Amos Gitai, Werner Kobe, and all of them they sat in a room, like your room, and television was on, and they spoke about, that was 100 years of cinema actually. 1995 was Lumiere Brothers, 1895 to 1995. So we were celebrating 100 years, and they were reflecting on their own views of cinema. So you were the influence.
I need to see the film.
Yeah, we see it in Trivandrum.
Yes.
Yeah, Amrit has already told me, and we're going to see it.
And it's my Facebook. I'm running a series on you, actually. I'm also marking you, Wim Wenders. For me, Wim is weight in motion. You are so weighty when you walk.
Thank you, but I'm not on Facebook.
So, you were the influence 13 years later in 1995. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
Sunil,
you.
You want to ask?
I want to see that.
Yeah, we're going to see it. Yeah.
Okay. I will let you know afterwards.
Hi, sir. Thank you so much for such beautiful words today. I feel right now very, very joyful after listening to you. My question is very personal. I am very excited and drawn to the road films, journey films. I know when I make films, they will all be about journey. I want to understand from you, if you can share from your experience whenever you shot a road film, how different it was from a film that were pre-decided in different locations. What are the kind of challenges you face and how planned, how unplanned you are? How do you go about it, and when do you start it until the time you finish shooting? How do things evolve during the journey of it?
Well, every film has its own journey, and there's not one general one general plan how to make a film without a script. Because the whole beauty of a road movie is that the road and the itinerary is already half the script, or is already the backbone to the script. And if you're not on a road, you can still do the same, but it's more difficult because you don't have that backbone. And I made other movies that were not road movies without a script, and that's a little bit more tricky, but you have the same effect that the crew and the actors are so much more with you because you do not know more than them, and you are at the same level, and it's a very democratic process because you want to know where is this story going. And that is a great thing to be also with your actors. They can contribute so much more than in a script where everything is predetermined before by the script. So, it is a liberating thing not to be in the corset of the film that you wrote, and either alone or with a writer a year before or 6 months before, because the film is meeting, and the actors are meeting the story, they meet each other, they meet places where they live in. They meet the light of your DOP. They are involved as a family in an adventure. And that produces situations that you could not possibly have written before. So I think it creates a different spirit on the set if you don't have the script like a Bible and everybody has to act. So it is exciting, but it can also be troublesome because you can run out of energy as a director, because in the end you have to somehow conceive of the whole thing and how it's going to fit together. And most of the people are happy at the end of the day and go home, and you sit there and you have to somehow write something for the next day. And actors are not really keen to sit with you. In the film Kings of the Road, that carries that name, I had two actors, and they were in a truck and they were riding together. And in the first week, we always sat in the evening together and thought of how is the next day going to look. And in the second week, the actors were tired and they said, "We're going to go to bed. You'll figure it out, Wim." And after 4 weeks, I was so wasted, I couldn't look anymore out of my eyes when I was shooting, because I had been up all night. And so we had to take a break. So I had more time to figure out how this could. And the actors, in the end, they're happy when they the next day shoot something that is not foreseen and that is exciting for them to invent, but they don't want to spend all night thinking about it. So in the end, you're alone, and that is the trouble with it. And so. At the end of such a film, you might come to the same conclusion that I sometimes come to: never again. Never again will I be so stupid and not be able to sleep, and I'm going to write a script that's going to be so nice. And then you do this film with a script and you think, oh, that sucks. I'm longing to make a film where I can change the direction. So you see, both are difficult. But I think one can get to amazing results if you don't have a script. And in today's landscape in filmmaking, producers and any institutions that give you money, government or whatever it is, they want a script more than ever. And they have all their dramaturges and they have their committees. They want a script. And they want to give you advice, and they want to tell you better improve it, and it's too long, and you have to develop it more. And then you develop it for the next 2 years, and then you don't want to do the movie anymore. You're sick and tired of developing it to death. So, and sometimes a lot of movies today are made by people who are tired of it and who don't want to do it anymore, because they've already done it for 2 years. They've done it already 10 times. So it's a difficulty. And I've turned to making documentaries because I simply did not have to write a script. But my students, they told me that in order to make a documentary, they now have to present a script. Yeah, believe it or not, at least 50 pages of very concise ideas how to make a documentary.
Gauri, you want to ask?
I'm curious how you direct.
Just give her a mic.
Mic is there.
Hi. I'm curious how you direct your actors. Like, I would like to know what's that exchange for your scripted stories or otherwise?
There is as many approaches to acting as there are actors on this planet. Yeah. There is not two actors who have the same idea of how to do it, because acting is a dangerous profession. It's more dangerous than directors or cameramen. Actors are putting their lives on the line. And actors are very precious, and I always admire actors for their courage. But they look at you, and sometimes they want to have directions. Not all actors. Some actors have it in their mind what they want, in their minds what they want to do. And that's sometimes the trouble with actors. They have their own approach, which is beautiful. And as a director, you have to find that approach if you haven't worked with them. That's why I like to work so much with people I already know, because I know their idea of acting and their approach, so I know how to deal with them. But sometimes you don't know all the actors, and some actors like first takes, and some actors like to rehearse for an eternity, and they get better with each rehearsal, and then you want to shoot, and they say, no, let's do another rehearsal. And while the other actor who's in the scene with them, he or she would rather have shot the first take and not have done all the rehearsals. And sometimes you realize that you have a scene, and some of them actors are getting slowly worse, and some others are getting better. And you have that situation that you have to deal with the fact that the ones who get better, you better shoot with them at the end, their close-ups, and the others you have better shoot right away, because they're never as good as in their first couple of takes. So it's very tricky for directors sometimes to deal with all these approaches and these conceptions of how to act, because everybody, really, I swear to God, I have not worked with two actors with the same idea of what their profession was. And even if there's methods and all of that, everybody has their own interpretation. So it's the greatest adventure of a film is actors. And especially in a documentary, the greatest adventure is how do people behave in front of a camera if they're not actors, but if they have a camera in front of them. It's almost more adventurous than with actors. But then again, no. It's just very, it's amazing to find out. And a lot of times actors want you to direct them. And the very word means you steer them into a direction and tell them what their character is and how they can bring that character out, and how they can bring something in themselves out that serves that character.
Okay. Do you want, should we end?
No, thank you for interrupting, because that is going to be endless.
So should we end now? Do you want to end, or do you want to go on? It's already 8 o'clock.
It's not 8, it's 5 to 8. One last, and then one other last. Thank you.
Hello. Good evening, sir.
And then we go here in the front. Yeah. Next to the laughing girl. Okay.
Good evening, sir. You are a legend. My name is Rohit. I'm a PhD research scholar, and I've driven 6 hours just to see you here. So that's how much you mean to me.
Thank you.
So.
Did you drive alone?
No, I had good company. Sir, most of the questions were answered. My basic PhD thesis in study of character through the lenses of script to actor. You said the script can change, the actors' performances are different. But to seeing the large, it's more than 5 decades in a way you have, that's why you are the legend. What's the process been from 60mm in black and white days to directing now with color, in terms of freedom, in terms of being with actors and the entire journey? If you can talk about that.
It is indeed an amazing journey, and when I started out, film was the only option. You could have a choice between 8mm, which I had already done when I was a little boy. That's not what I wanted. It wasn't cinema, but it was film. And 60mm, the Bolex camera I bought, was an instrument that helped to think of film in a different way. And you would frame it differently, and you would learn about how to work the camera. And people in front of the 60mm camera were already more impressed than if I had an 8mm camera. And then I made the first film in 1935, and that, to me, was real work. That was real cinema. And then I made the first film with Robbie, my cameraman, and that made it even more real. And then there was real actors. So slowly, filmmaking took on other dimensions and the more the tools shifted, the more it became something that wanted to become a language and was a form and needed to be mastered. In 8mm, I shot already as a little boy. I made lots of little films with my family, but it was mastered. There was no language. It was fascination to be able to record something that you could then watch afterwards at home. And so anyway, on the way to language, I made a lot of experience. My first 60mm camera, well, I had a camera, but I didn't have a good tripod, so I didn't pan. My tripod was sort of, it made funky pans, so I did not pan. I made shots that were as long as a reel, and a reel of 60mm was 4 minutes. So my shots were 4 minutes long, and there was no cut. Because I felt there was something so amazing about filming and putting the camera on a tripod and shooting something. If I would stop it, I was sure that the next second something was going to happen. So I never stopped. I always shot till the film ran out. So that was very rudimentary. And I only slowly learned to stop, and when I wanted to stop and move the camera. I mean, that was a whole thing to learn for me, to move the camera. And once I learned how to move the camera, I thought there was nothing better than moving the camera. And then I could move the put the camera in a car. And I learned how to make shots in a moving vehicle, and that was another fantastic achievement. So slowly you learn that cinema is a language, and it has different things you can do. And the most amazing thing is to film a face and then show what that face is looking at, he or she. And you have the so-called POV, the point of view of that person. And then you can cut from what that person sees to what he actually or she actually sees. And that in itself is an incredible adventure. That films, and if you see a close-up of a person, and then you see what that person sees as an audience, you're immediately in a different way connected to that person than if you just see that person in a scene. If you see what he or she sees, that's the tiniest little unit of story, is a close-up and the reverse angle of what the person sees. So slowly you learn all sorts of stuff, and you learn it's a language. It works in certain ways, and you have a lot of possibilities. And in my life, these possibilities kept enlarging, because out of a sudden there were not just film cameras, but there were also other cameras. First of all, there were video cameras, but video cameras could do things that film cameras couldn't do. And then there was digital cameras that again could do things that no film camera could do. And eventually there were 3D cameras, which is two cameras that saw, like, you could look out of your two eyes and didn't have to close one, but you could see with two and film with two. So the tools multiplied and got larger, and I grew myself with that, and the possibilities grew. And today's filmmakers, young filmmakers, have an amazing variety of tools at their hand, almost scary. It's almost too much that you can do today if you start. And in a way, I'm lucky that I was so reduced in the beginning. I slowly was able to understand everything. You could do one thing after another. So, but you still keep learning. And for instance, actors are different. You have to learn somehow. And then you have to learn how to combine their capacities. And then you have to learn how much you want to rehearse or how much you want to encourage them to add something themselves from their own existence. And some actors like that, and then you have to take care of that they are able to do that. And other actors are scared of improvisation. Like when we did Wings of Desire, you saw that the other day, when Peter Falk arrived, my two actors, my two angels were scared shitless because Peter was a master in improvisation. He had done all these movies with John Cassavetes and he loved improvisation. And my two angel actors were scared of improvisation. They had never done this. They were theater, their training was in theater. And to be with an actor who always came up with new lines scared them. And so, what do you do then when you have two scared angels? So you learn. And finally, even after 50 years, I made a film called Perfect Days, and there I, for the first time, had an actor who so much became the character with his entire being and learned how to clean toilets like nobody ever cleaned a toilet before. And so that actor told me that, or showed me that I could make, even if this was completely fiction, and he was an invention, and he had never cleaned a toilet before in his life. But when we made the film, he was so much the character, and he so much loved being in this simple room on the tatami with his music and without television and internet and all of that. He was happy. And he thought, as an actor, he was finally in the place where he had always wanted to be. And I realized I could make a film with him that was no longer fiction. I could follow him. And we stopped rehearsing and we shot. Each time the rehearsal, and we never did anything else. The film was shot exactly like you would want to do a documentary. In a documentary, you never tell your people, please do this once and then we shoot it. No, you shoot it. And with him, we shot a documentary and it was fiction at the same time. And that, after 50 years, 50-some years, was the first time in my life I had that freedom. So you keep learning. I had that freedom also because I had a digital camera that saw so much that my cameraman was not lighting, he was taking down lights. He was taking lights down outside because he put filters on the street lights because they were too bright inside the room. So instead of throwing lights into a situation, out of a sudden I made the first film where I had to take light down. You see, that's how much it changed. And the actor was no longer doing his scenes, he was the scenes, and I was witnessing them. So filmmaking is an amazing process that over the last 6 years since I'm making them has changed so much that I'm really privileged. I feel that I was able to keep learning. And I still don't know about mathematics. I still don't know how that could possibly be. I'm 79 years old, right? So I made films in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the 0 years, the 10 years, the 20s. I make films now for 7 decades. How can that be? I'm 79 and I'm working in my 7th decade. This is mathematically impossible.
That's true.
How does it happen?
Like all your films?
Is it Einstein's theory of relativity?
Could be.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you all. Yeah, one last
question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Very last.
Sorry?
The very last.
Yes. I hope I don't regret asking this question, but and I hope you don't throw me out. But I know, as a filmmaker with so many, like you're filled with artistic visions, I just want to understand your journey of how do you approach commercial viability for your projects? Maybe when you started initially, maybe now, or do you just not look or think about that at all? Because it's somewhere down the line we think if we are not making money or the film is not reaching a certain numbers, we're all unsuccessful. So how do you do that? And maybe over 7 decades, how have you navigated that?
I haven't. The thing is there are people who tell you they know what is commercial. I mean, it's a strange word, but the word exists, and I know the word, and some people think they know what it means. And especially in America, in the studio system, there are guys who think they know what a commercial film is. And then they make movies that are $100 million expensive, and they flop. So they don't know it. They pretend to know it. And most institutions that finance films, they would really love to know why some films are commercials and commercial and others are not. Nobody really knows. And especially if you make a film along all the rules that produce commercial films, you're not gonna you're not be able to make a commercial film, because you can make films that run in commercial circuits, but they're not necessarily successful. So, and in my book, you cannot know it. And if the studios knew, we'd all be fucked. But luckily, they also do not know. And I have made films where I thought they're going to crucify me. I made Paris, Texas. It was very successful. I had a hard time to digest that success because everybody thought, Wim, now you're going to make another one like it. And I realized that was disaster. If I was going to try that, that was the end of me. So after Paris, Texas, because it was successful, I didn't make films for 3 years because I just didn't know how to deal with the expectation. And then I thought I'd make something that is the very, very opposite. Wings of Desire was in black and white and crazy angels, and I thought they're going to crucify me. This is not what they expect. And it was more commercial than Paris, Texas. And then I made other films when I thought, wow, they're going to work like dynamite, and they completely flopped. So you can't know it, and that's a very good thing. That is very good. And if they force you to make a commercial film, pretend you know how to do it.
Thank you. Yeah.